Welcome everyone. It's a delight to be on Zoom with Ted and Abby, dear friends and colleagues who are going to be speaking to our congregation next Tuesday, October 18th. We put together a Wallace Moore lecture event funded by Colleen Druschild and her family. And the title of the event is Reimagining the New Chicago, Faithfully Welcoming Climate Migrants. Reimagining the New Chicago, Faithfully Welcoming Climate Migrants. I'm really looking forward to this event personally. I'll be there. We'll do a little Q&A after they speak back and forth to us in the sanctuary. But I'm just really looking forward to introducing the two of them to all of you right now and giving them a chance to say a word about what they're looking forward to. So I'll start with you, Ted. I met Ted through my wife, Ariane, who was a student at McCormick Seminary a few moons ago. I don't know how many years ago, 12, 13 years ago. And Ted teaches or taught Hebrew Bible, Old Testament at McCormick and has recently retired, but is a fantastic teacher and a Hebrew Bible scholar, done a lot of work in Genesis, I believe in particular. But Ted is now retired, but lives here in the Chicagoland area. And we've been able to stay in touch, him and his wife, Paula. Abby, also a connection with dear McCormick Seminary community, is someone we met while we were down in school there. And Abby has just become such a dear friend and partner and colleague in ministry and has recently relocated to Chicago, which she might tell you a little bit about as it relates to our event, but is now living in the area. And we were just so delighted several months ago to come up with this idea together, and we're excited about next Tuesday night. So Ted and Abby, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so just tell us, this is a little teaser video, just tell us what's giving you energy about getting ready for this event. What's a takeaway you're hoping someone might leave afterward?
Sure. I'll start. For me, this interest behind this event comes from two big discoveries that I've made only in the last few years. One of them comes about because my long-term interest in the Bible and the environment. And that is that one of the major effects of climate change will be the migration of peoples. There are going to be areas of the world uninhabitable, and people will be leaving those areas and moving to other areas. And the immigration conversation in the US is already contentious, but with the rise of climate change, it'll put even more pressure on migration. And so it's something that we really have to be aware of and start thinking more about. That's one of my discoveries.
Yeah, and so part of this theme that came about because Ted and I were talking about climate and migration, and starting to talk about how in the future migration of people in the United States to the United States and around the United States will be impacted by climate. And in that conversation, I had this realization, and finally was able to articulate that I've now moved twice across the country, across the United States, because of climate change and climate related issues. I lived in California and was in California around some of the biggest forest and wildfires. Was there during the fire that wiped out Paradise, California, and we were over 200 miles away, but couldn't breathe. We're not allowed to leave our houses because the air was too polluted, and it became increasingly hard for my anxiety and for my physical health to stay in California. And so when life circumstances meant I could move, I moved to Texas, and then had a child, and in Texas was told that in the Texas summer heat, that my kid couldn't be outside in the sun for more than 20 minutes. And even in that 20 minutes had to be in the shade because it was too hot. And we had a conversation about how it was going to get more hot every summer for my kid, and for all kids and for all people. And so for her health and for my health, we made the decision to move back up to Illinois, which is my home. And so having this realization that climate migration was already a part of my story, and realizing that my story is simply a microcosm, an anecdote of the larger story of people all over the world who have to move. And for many of those people, they're leaving their homes and not returning to their homeland, which is what I was doing, but returning or moving to places that that would be strange. And what's true about climate change in the United States and migration is that the US is one of the major contributors to climate change. So we've created the suffering that is impacting other people so that they have to leave their homes. And then we then have the responsibility, and Ted and I will talk about the biblical responsibility to welcome these strangers into our midst. And here in Chicago, we have a city, a title of being a climate resilient city, because we're so close to a freshwater lake, and kind of where we are in the geography of the world means that we'll have a lot better chance of being resilient. So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about, and kind of why I feel excited to have this conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So tell me just one more thing. In the title of our event, it says Reimagining the New Chicago. Tell us more about that. What do you mean by the New Chicago?
So just quickly before we go there, you should know that Abby's just completing her dissertation for her doctoral degree, and I was reading part of it this morning, and she uses this great phrase called sacrifice zones for the areas of the world that are going to be hit first and hardest by climate change. And she's already mentioned some of those sacrifice zones, although we're pretty wealthy here and we can move around and deal with them. The really bad ones in the world are going to be hit so hard by famine and drought, and that people are just, as Abby said, going to have to leave and won't and move other places.
Yeah.
And those are places like the Horn of Africa and Fiji, and places that are going to like literally be taken over by the water. Yeah.
And Chicago has been blessed with a certain location and climate that it's a place where we can keep living. So it's going to be a receiving center for people that are going to be hit by climate change. And it is already. So for example, the buses of migrants that Texas has shipped to Chicago, a number of those are from Venezuela and other parts of Central America, which are right now being hit by drought, which is related to climate change. So this is something that's very close to home. And I think those of us living in Chicago need to start thinking about what it will mean for us and how we can live out our Christian vocation to be a welcoming community.
That's right.
We were also, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ab.
Oh, I was going to say too, that when we started thinking about this, we both kind of were thinking about the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation, and that the New Jerusalem is God coming to earth to be with us, to build God's beloved community really here, and that the opportunity with the deep suffering and challenge of climate migration and all that entails is that the opportunity is that together we get to live into the call that Jesus has for each of us to welcome the stranger and to love our neighbors and to build God's beloved community in a city that's going to change because of the influx of migrants, and can bring us then closer to this New Jerusalem of what God really calls us to be in community.
Yeah,
So-
New Chicago, New Jerusalem, New Creation. Yeah, that came to
That's
mind
right.
when you were speaking, Abby, too. Just this notion of, yeah, the fullness, the shalom that's there, and that is yet to be realized. Mhm.
So whenever we hit a crisis like that, we always look back and ask ourselves, what are our religious resources for responding?
Mhm.
And that's my other big discovery, which a few years ago, I didn't even know we had these religious resources, but it's partly the result of a new project I'm working on reading the book of Genesis as a collection of migration stories,
Mm.
which I had never quite thought of doing, even though I've been reading Genesis forever. And then realizing that the motive for these migrations is overwhelmingly climate change.
Mm.
Yep.
That is famine
Yeah. Yeah.
in antiquity. And so our earliest religious ancestors, all of these big families of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, at one point or another in their lives are forced to move because of climate change.
Mm. Mm.
So what the writers of Genesis are telling us is that our heritage, our people, are people that were climate migrants.
Mm. Mm.
That's a really stunning discovery to me, to realize that our ancestors in the Bible were climate migrants, and the stories told about them were intent on highlighting that.
Mm.
So for me, there are two really important things. Abby, again, in her dissertation, I just read it, so I'm thinking
Yes,
about
that's
it,
awesome.
says one of the things that's happening today is people that are in these sacrifice zones are finding their voice,
Mm.
and they're starting to tell their stories of what it's like to be living in a vulnerable landscape and being forced to move because of climate change. And these are the biblical stories in Genesis. Exactly.
Wow.
So by reading them, reading our own familiar Bible stories, one of the things we can learn is what is it like to be a climate migrant? Because they show us.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit more about that, how biblical, on Tuesday, how biblical stories reveal the experience of climate migrants from the inside.
Mm. Mm.
And the other thing that's important is that these stories really are building an identity for the people of Israel, as if they're saying, who are we?
Mm.
And when they answer that question, they say, we were climate migrants.
Mm.
What does that mean to recover a sense of our own legacy and our own heritage and our own sense ancestry as climate migrants,
Mm.
for our sort of turning to those who are experiencing that today?
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And one of the things that you just said, Ted, about how people who have been in these who have been forced into to be in these sacrifice zones are finding their voice and demanding and calling for support and change. And one of the things we're going to do on Tuesday is invite people to sign the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, or sign a letter in support of the treaty, which was created by people in the Pacific Islands. The demand was first created by them, asking governments to create this legally binding treaty, which would mean there'd be no more fossil fuels, and there would be a just transition that would support people who've been forced to live in these sacrifice zones. And they've been asking people of faith around the world to support this call for a treaty as a way to live out our faith. So we'll get the opportunity all together as a group to sign that letter.
Beautiful.
In support. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, this is a wonderful teaser. I'm so excited for next Tuesday. Abby and Ted, thanks for taking the time to do this on Zoom for a few minutes. Just a reminder to folks watching, we'll meet next Tuesday, October 18th, 7 p.m. And we'll maybe go until 8:30, depending on the Q&A. And we'll have a little reception following with some cookies and drinks for folks who can linger. But really looking forward to it. Peace to you, Abby and Ted.
We're looking forward to it too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. See you soon. Bye-bye.